district and the community on weathering this change in life for all of us. It may cause some people major adjustments for everyone, for losing power and all of that stuff. But the district came through with keeping water flowing and in and out, and we did an excellent job. It was not easy for our crew, and I'm sure I speak for the whole community and for the whole board when we say thank you very, very much for an excellent job. In talking to someone, this is my statement point number 2, I discovered that there are cameras all over the Bay Area on mountaintops that look out over the Bay Area. They're all around Lake Tahoe, they're in the mountains. And when I went to the website that showed the orientations of them and the locations of them, it turns out there are none for the unincorporated coastal community. And since we have our Alta Vista site, which is high elevation, I would like this district, if the board approves and we can put it on as an agenda item, to work with the agencies that are doing this for other communities and offer our site as a location for cameras, so we can look up and down the coast side and east and west, well, even east and west, because these cameras are monitored so that we would get faster notice if a fire happened. And given the huge number of eucalyptus on the coast side, I think it would be very, very important for us to do it, and we could work with these agencies to orient them so they look down the coast side, down towards Half Moon Bay, and up around Montara Mountain, so that our community is safe. Greg has been bringing up the issue of fire safety in terms of water storage, but it's something. This is a first step. You have to be able to identify exactly where the fire is, and so this is something, like I say, I'd be happy to do some research on this and get the information for the board and have it as a future agenda item. But I think we'd need to work with the agencies, we'd need to work with the county, we'd need to work with Coastside Fire District. It's, I think it's a travesty that a community like us, with all of these eucalyptus trees and bad roads, doesn't have better fire watch services. So, oral comments, other than those on the agenda, I have a comment I have 2 comments for the water rate study, and I have one from Chris Tholog on unification and bypass property. Please.
There you go. So, at your September meeting, I gave you a document, unification. Not surprisingly, I haven't heard a thing from any of the board members on it. Scott, I'd really appreciate if you pay attention to what I'm saying.
I'm taking notes, Chris, and don't you tell me how to do this job.
Scott, I'll tell you what I choose to is public comment. One correction to that document. At the time, I thought the water supplies for CCWD were constrained. I now understand they are not. The permits are constrained, but they're only drawing 50% of their Hetchy flow. So there'll be a revision to that plan to reflect the fact that we don't have water constraints really anywhere. As Tanya's report pointed out 2 years ago, we've got sufficient reserves in this district for the next 40 years. Of course, we'd like better quality, but quantity isn't the issue. So why am I here? I've been trying for 2 months to meet with Scott and Catherine to discuss this plan and to also discuss what their plan is for the topics that I'm raising. And this is coming up now because of the actions of this board to pursue a land grab of the bypass property. So when we put the tunnel through, the surplus property became available. This district has tried since 2014 to first verify that there's water under that property and then to acquire it without the required public process that's specified in the LCP. There's a lot of documentation about that, and I thought in 2017 we pretty much put that to bed. But it turned out recently, this summer, this district has been staking out well lease sites on that property with no notification to Caltrans, and after that, survey markers for how to connect those well sites to your current mains. So I'm outraged about this, and I'm here to tell you that without a public process, there's no way this district is going to acquire that property. And I'd encourage you to lead a public process. Now, it should be about transparency here instead of preparing for potential litigation, which seems to be the way this district chooses to address controversy rather than communication. So the other reasons why it's important to look at this now is we're about to address a very serious climate change crisis. And it may not be a slow trickle of the sea level rise. It may be some catastrophic storm. And we're going to have to be in a position to respond to that as a community, not just Montara Water and Sanitary District. And finally, I think that we need to have an integrated plan for response to earthquake or a climate change induced weather event. So what would I expect your plan to be addressing? First, I think that you need to solve the governance problem that you have at SAM. You've got a short-term settlement, but that's not addressing the long-term structure that's hamstrung us for all these decades. You didn't create it, you've only been responding to it, but it's dysfunctional for Half Moon Bay, it's dysfunctional for this district. We need to have a plan for the bypass property. Instead of you hanging out in closed session trying to figure out what you're going to do, you ought to bring it out into the light. You don't need this water tomorrow. You've got an adequate supply, and we need to really look at this and understand what's in the best interest of the community, not just what you, in your infinite wisdom, in closed session, think that we should be doing with this property. That's what the LCP says. That's what Caltrans says, that's what San Mateo County Planning says, that's what the Coastal Commission says. You have a wonderful opportunity here. If you were to pursue this with the best interest of everyone in an open participative process, then you can make some real traction. Doing it the way you're doing it, not going to go anywhere. Particularly, I'll point to one other example. Clemens, you wrote a letter to San Mateo County when they criticized the fact that you had gone to the Board of Supervisors and gotten a recommendation that this district receive that property. You wrote a letter saying, well, just transfer the property and we'll do a specific plan later. Number one, how many decades, Catherine, have we been trying to fight off the fact that we're not a land use planning agency? Right? And here, your general manager is recommending that we put the cart in front of the horse first, that we allocate the property, concluding what it was that we were supposed to be in a public process about. It's absolutely nuts. So the other issues that I would say that you need to be looking at are, how do you offset the scale deficiency that you've got here? And you've got a staff of 6, 2 administrative, 4 technical, and you're thinking about taking on that property and doing the stewardship number. How are you going to do it with this scale? Finally, I'd say that you need to have a plan to ensure that the policies, the important policies, and with that I mean the specific plan for the bypass property, survives future boards, that it needs to be locked down. Just like post buys property so that in the future it's guaranteed what they can do. I think a specific plan process with the Board of Supervisors and the Coastal Commission, we can lock down protections that are what you're trying to do in closed session. So my plan that I proposed addresses all of this. I haven't seen anything from you guys that addresses any of it. So I'd really like to hear specifically from you, Scott, and you, Catherine, what it is that you're trying to accomplish that I'm not accomplishing with this plan, and what are the problems inherent in the plan. You know, you guys for years have just shut down all discussion that could lead in the direction of even cooperation. You wouldn't give me a second when I was on the board to talk about an intertie. So I think, again, it's about sunshine. It's about having an open public process and not shutting down the communication that you should be having with your constituents. So I'd ask that you agendize this, and you have a opportunity for both you to hear from the public, but really for us to hear from you. What is it that you are doing with this plan? What is it that you intend in long-term, how do you want to protect us? So, I don't know if any of you bothered to read this.
Oh, yes.
Okay. Scott, did you bother to read this? Or are you just too busy? Or you mute? Okay, well, I'll take it at that. So, let me explain it to you. We've got a variety of multiple service providers on the coast. And we need to look at how that's configured and whether it's going to work for future generations. For decades, we've been at war with San Mateo County and with other districts in a manner that isn't helping us. And I think for many years, it was the only option we had available. When the county was failing to enforce the regulations that we were relying on, it was important for us to be there. But I think a lot of things have changed in the last 30 years. And that we need to look at that with an open eyes and really say, what are we trying to accomplish here? What do we want to leave as a legacy? And I think that having an open discussion about this is critical. Again, if you don't engage in public process with that property, the chance that you will end up influencing it is, in my opinion, zero.
Chris, it's been about 15 minutes, so if you could wrap it up, I'd appreciate it. We've got a long agenda.
You bet, Catherine.
Thank you.
If I had a chance to meet with you guys and talk about these issues, I'd appreciate it. And if Scott, if you can't make the time to meet with a constituent and be civil, then I understand that. But maybe you shouldn't be on the board if you can't take the time to do that.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
I will tell you, I have been out of country for 2 months, so it has not been, I was home for a few days and then back out of country. So the last 2 months, as I told you, I haven't been available.
I appreciate that, Catherine.
Would it be appropriate if I could make a quick comment about the new affordable housing bill, which is moving through?
Yes, sure.
Real quick. Just advice to
Chris,
the public.
please stay for the meeting.
No, Catherine, that was enough for
Or
me.
stay through
Sorry.
my comment, please. There's a bill moving through the California legislature right now,
It was signed.
which takes all public land owned by the state or state agencies will become available for affordable housing. So one possible alternative the state is looking at for our Caltrans right-of-way is a couple hundred affordable units up there also. So that's one of the things we've been looking at. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rick.
Any more oral comments? Hearing none. We have no public hearing. Consent agenda. We have approval of minutes for October 3rd and the Finance Committee for October 9th, 2019. Approved financial statements for September 2019. Approved warrants for November 1, 2019. SAM Flow Report. Monthly review of current investment portfolio. Connection permit applications received. Monthly water production report for 2019. And rain report. Solar energy report. monthly public agent retirement service report for August 2019, monthly review of possible action concerning consulting agreement with Custama Strategic Consulting.
I move for approval.
One second.
Thank you very much. Discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions, motion carries 4-0. Moving right along to review and possible action concerning water rate study under old business, and I have 2 public comment slips, so we'll start with Greg Diegas.
Greg Diegas, Montara, and, as usual, I have like 7 things to say, but I'll only focus on one here, and I'll send you all a little memo, and I'll hopefully participate in another Finance Committee meeting to make the rest. But the one point I would mention, it derives from the fact that one of the assumptions in the rate study was that $500,000 borrowed from the, if I've got this right, sewer reserves was transferred to the water reserves and did not have to be repaid. Now, I don't know what the mechanics and appropriateness of that is. Maybe it's fine, but it flagged the issue with me that as part of this rate study, we need to see a projection of the reserve balances going forward. And I would say 20 years, maybe I'm being silly, but beyond the amount of years where we have specifically targeted expenses, which is 5, and I think, I'm not sure, it's not in this handout, but I think you did a projection at some point in this study. I'm just saying, when you evaluate these, show the reserve balances going forward so we see where we are. My immediate impression in one scenario was we'd have 0 reserves left over after we did the capital projects, and that didn't seem right for a capital reserve. And in fact, there's a page in here that implies we need about $1.5 million. So please project the capital reserves under the different rate scenarios. And then the related issue is, and I know they're 2 separate budgets and there's legalities and stuff I probably don't understand, but it seems to me you got to look at the sewer reserves at the same time you're looking at the water reserves. Even if it's not part of the water rate study, you ought to have a forecast for what the sewer reserves would be absent a rate change to make sure that $500,000 doesn't have to be paid back and you have adequate reserves in the other half of the, you see what I'm saying? I mean, it'd be great to do it all at once. Maybe you have reasons you don't want to do it all at once, but I think you have to look at both sets of reserves. Thank you.
Thank you. Lisa Ketchum. Sid, do you want to make a comment?
I guess so.
You don't have to. I'm not twisting your arm.
Speaker slip, I came in late. Sorry.
Lisa Ketchum, a resident of the Pillar Ridge Manufactured Home Community, and I'd like to speak to the proposal for mobile homes in the rate
Okay.
study. I should know this. So Pillar Ridge has an agreement with the district regarding fixed charges and usage costs that were agreed to in return for giving up a valuable water right. Some background. The 227 homeowners in this designated affordable housing community own their manufactured homes but pay space rent for the land it sits on and the common area facilities. All Pillar Ridge operating, capital expenses, and debt service are ultimately paid by the residents through the space rent. Pillar Ridge has been a customer of this water district since 1965. In 1990, during the water shortage and moratorium, Pillar Ridge developed 3 wells with enough water to supply our community and related infrastructure, treatment plant, pressure tank, and pump, and storage tanks. In the 2000s, hundreds of thousands of dollars were spent on maintenance and upgrades to this system. In 2014, all that infrastructure and the water rights were turned over to the district for $1. Since then, Pillar Ridge residents have paid the district for the water from those wells. This is in contrast to the airport wells that the district paid to develop and continues to pay the county for the water. Very different situation. It's kind of like that was our contribution. I just wanted to remind you of this agreement. Thank you.
Carlisle?
Sorry.
Wow, he was tall. Carlisle Young, Moss Beach. I live out in Seal Cove, and I think we're on old business, right? Water increase rate, is that right? Water rate study. I missed the study, so I'm assuming you're going to raise the rates.
It's, the study is...
Yeah, I'll look at it when I
in
get a
your agenda.
chance. I came in late, and I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I missed the rant. I don't know, I mean, I didn't even fill out a public comment, so maybe I could ask, is there some nefarious thing afoot that no one knows about, or is he just smoking something?
We can't talk about that
Okay, I know,
right
I
now.
missed my chance for that. So, anyway, I'm just here on behalf of all the people that might be in my kind of situation where they're a single person on a limited income, and I would just say that everybody's raising their rates, and everybody's, you know, suffering. I think if you read next door, which maybe none of you do, but there have been quite a few comments about the school bond rate jump, and of course, people in this district mentioned the Montara water and sanitary sewer jump as well. So I'm sure that they'll be put, you know, in more hardship if you raise the water rates. Maybe consider the single seniors that might be living in a house that they're not using a lot of water, and keep the lowest rate low. Maybe people from Pillar Ridge would also be advantaged by that, but I'm just saying. And I didn't read it, I'm sorry.
It's all right, you can read it now.
I will, I'm gonna, is this big one, or that one?
It's just like
Oh, this is the agenda book too, right? Thank you.
So, thank you. Clemens?
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, we're at the topic of the water rate study, and this is not for the first time. We've actually looked at this since at least 4 months. And the background is that we had a Prop 218 until last year. This year we did not. We weren't able to raise rates this fiscal year, and it's become evident that the income isn't covering the expenses. We knew that already, actually some years ago, but the district chose to keep the rate increases at inflationary levels. So we bridged this year with what we call a $500,000 loan. The background is there were loans the other way, which means it's essentially, that's one of the reasons why we're not considering paying it back, okay? But that is something that we probably should show as well. You're correct in that. And so we have brought this to the board already, again, some months ago. And the idea of a specific, since most of these increases, since the vast majority of this money that is needed is for capital improvements, the district really suggested, the board suggested to look at a water system reliability charge. And so separate from the existing water rates that are based on meter service charges, and it's a fixed component, and then a variable use component, introduce a water system reliability charge. And we've met with the Finance Committee now as well, in advance of this meeting, looked at a number of options, and we really honed it down to basically 4 major questions that I think we have to address and think through. So this is a larger process. We're really at the beginning of it. So we definitely welcome input that we've received at the Finance Committee meeting. Thank you, Lisa, for your comment. These are all good comments. We're really at we're still at the beginning of this process, even though we're already 2 months into it. Since this is a completely new charge that we're looking at, we want to do a very thorough job in thinking this through, how this could be implemented. So with that, I want to hand it over to Alex from Bartle Wells, who's been helping us.
Do we have a,
through this
yes, we
process.
do, okay.
Yeah, so we have some handouts, so we don't, that we can, well, first of all, it's in the packet.
Yeah, but if we're gonna use the projector, I'm gonna move to the back.
I think we're gonna use actually handouts.
Just handouts, okay.
So we have enough handouts for the public as well. And I think that it makes it easier, everybody can stay seated and concentrated and participate in a discussion after you go a little bit through what we've done so far and just presenting these 4 main questions that we really would like some guidance on.
Clemens, before you start, could you just explain what a reliability charge is? Or is it gonna go?
We'll talk about that.
Okay, never mind.
Yes, that's what's coming up.
Okay.
Alex, I think we have the floor.
Oh, great, and I'll just try to walk through the background pretty quickly. I think Clemens just covered it. I mean, historically, as Clemens mentioned, you go back to 2010, there were some, changes in the rate structure, there was decreases to the fixed charges, increases to the volumetric charges, and you went from 2 tiers to 4 tiers, so, a little more reliance on the revenues from usage, which helped keep costs down for lower users. And since 2010, it's been mostly inflationary rate increases. The last rate study was in 2015, had just, inflationary rate increases. And what we've seen with water use in the district is your customers here have done a great job keeping their water use down. It's very impressive compared to a lot of other communities that I work with. And a lot of people, even though water use has been historically low here, have been able to cut back. So a lot of customers now, in inflation-adjusted terms, are paying the same, and in some cases less than they were paying, back in 2010 or before. So the bills haven't really gone up for many people unless they've increased their needs. The district has known, and Clemens is mentioning this for a while, I think at board meetings, and telling me that, hey, the revenues coming in really don't support the capital needs that this district has. Historically, the district has relied on outside funding sources for its major capital needs. When you acquired the water system, the GO bonds that were issued also provided funding for some of the critical upgrades to get the system into decent shape. And since then, you've also gotten some state subsidized financing. And when you refunded your GO bonds, you're able to take out some additional money without increasing debt service. So you've been able to get by with the major capital projects without really needing to raise rates for a while. But when we look at what the needs are going forward, this district, like many agencies in the Bay Area, around California as well, has got a lot of aging infrastructure that's going to need rehabilitation, replacement. The stuff's been okay for a while. It's getting older, but there needs to be a significant increase in funding needs, a reinvestment to keep the system in good shape in future years and keep reliable service going for the water service for the customers. When we look at your financial data from last fiscal year, your rates are only supporting about $100,000 for capital needs after paying all your O&M and debt service, etc. Part of that was due to a temporary increase in some operating costs, which we think are going to go down, from what I understand. But in the big picture, the rates, come nowhere near to generating what the infrastructure needs are. Now, the latest 5-year capital improvement program, the average funding that it suggests is about $1.8 million per year. The rates are only generating 100,000 or so, maybe a few 100,000 if the expenses were a little bit lower. Your total water rate revenues, to put that in context, your total water rate revenues are about $1.9 million, and you need, roughly that same amount in annual capital needs. So it's a significant increase if you were to get to these levels next year. You're not the only agency facing this. As I mentioned, we work with a lot of agencies in the Bay Area, and for many of them, we've been trying to ramp up funding for what they see in the future as kind of a tidal wave of pipeline replacements and infrastructure replacements coming down the line. So originally, we started looking at this as a water rate study. Clemens was saying, hey, we got to get our water rates up. But as we worked with the board and working with staff, and with the finance committee, started looking into it, really it's the capital needs that are driving the revenue increase. So what's being proposed instead of an across-the-board rate increase is something that we're being called a water system reliability charge, which is a proposed separate charge from your water rates. It's a dedicated funding source for capital needs, whether it's rehab and replacement, you have other upgrades that you need to address ongoing deficiencies and to support long-term reliability and fire protection, etc. Your regular rates would continue to fund the water system operations and debt service, but this new charge would fund kind of the long-term infrastructure rehabilitation that's needed. So this is just what's being proposed. This is kind of it's still in the process of being worked out, so appreciate that folks are weighing in, because that's what we want at this stage. One of the things we thought that was, since this is a charge that's for the infrastructure that's benefiting all the properties out there, that it could be a charge instead of a bi-monthly bill. It could be collected on the property tax rolls, similar to how you collect your sewer rates. And again, the nexus there, the charge benefits all the properties, including your water customers and to a degree your fire service protection customers as well. If that's the case, that means the charges couldn't be implemented until the next fiscal year to put them on the property tax rolls. There are a lot of alternatives for how such a charge could be implemented. On the residential side, I think what sounded like something that was a good option. It could be a fixed charge per single-family home, since it's the infrastructure to support that home, regardless of who's there now or in 20 years or what the water use level is. With that, there could be reduced charges for multifamily units, mobile homes, and accessory dwelling units that tend to have, put lower demands on the system. And there could be reduced charges for customers who have private fire service protection only, who aren't putting the same levels of demand on the system, but still are benefiting from the capacity in the system that provides fire service protection. For commercial, it could be a fixed charge based on water meter size, is a common way a lot of agencies might do it, or it could be some other factor. We also talked about the charges could be partially based on usage. It could be partially fixed, partially based on usage. In that case, the charges could go up and down each year, and we made up an example of what if it's 50% fixed revenue recovery, 50% usage-based recovery. So there's no right or wrong answer here. And we kind of talked about these issues at a couple of finance committee meetings. The other big issue out there, as Clemens is talking about, that we want to get board input on, is what funding level. Obviously, if you want to go and start supporting roughly $2 million a year of ongoing capital funding next year, you're talking about a doubling of the revenues coming in from the ratepayers. So one option could be to phase it in over time, start with something at a lower level so you're generating some funding. Another thing we'll note is that one of the sources of funding for this district for capital has been the GO bonds, which didn't just acquire the system, but funded some of the key upgrades. Those GO bonds are have been out there for a while now. There's only about 7-8 years left of payments, and then they're going to fall away. So the property owners are going to see their annual payments go down. So something like this could dovetail at the back end. Maybe there's a lower level of funding that then could kick up in future years. The other thing I wanted to mention is we know the needs are out there, but a lot of these needs are long-term needs. There's always risks if you don't fund infrastructure upgrades, but at the same time you don't have to solve this whole thing immediately. A lot of agencies look long-term and come up with a plan. You're going to get there long-term, but even steps in the right direction are very beneficial for funding. more of the infrastructure needs. We made up a couple of examples of charges. These are just, rough examples, just to give you a sense of the order of magnitude of what you'd be looking at. And in the slides here, we have an example of fixed charges. What if you charge, fixed charge per homeowner at different levels, anywhere from $500,000 to $2 million. $500,000 level, you're talking a fixed charge that equates to, about $22 a month.
Alex, the $500,000 to $2 million is based on what our receipts would be, not the value of the house, right?
Yes. This would be the revenues generated from the charge. So it's really what level of capital funding are you generating from the charge. If it's $500,000 a year, you'd have a fixed charge about $22 and change per month, which you can collect, annually. It's about $270. Up to, $1 million a year would be double that, about $45 a month, the equivalent. Ultimately it may need to be higher. We also made an example of kind of a hybrid charge, which was, half fixed and half usage. Just again to give you a sense of the order of magnitude. Now, obviously this is based on a lot of assumptions. The final charges would reflect the board's policy objectives and how the charges would be implemented. But on the fixed and usage side, you'd be looking at the $500,000 per year funding level, which is only about a quarter of what you need. A usage charge of about $2 per unit of water, and the fixed charge would then be, half of what it was in the other example, about the equivalent of $11 a month, or, $120 plus a little more per year. And as Clemens mentioned, we've kind of hashed through this with the Finance Committee a couple times and gotten a lot of good ideas, but really we're kind of at a point where in order to come up with the details of the charge and what you want to see, we're looking to get some board input on, for a charge like this to be implemented, what levels of funding would the board be comfortable going out with a Prop 218 process to adopt? Keeping in mind, you don't have to make the final decision on what rates are charged. First you have to put something in the Prop 218, but it's not really to the Prop 218 hearing that you adopt a maximum charge. Even if you did adopt a maximum charge, you'd still have the discretion to kind of phase in the charges over time like you've done with your rates in the past. And number two, along with that, how would the charges be implemented? Would you be looking to go out of the gate with the charge, or maybe get something in place and step it up over time? The third thing is, how would it be billed? Would it be part of the bi-monthly charges, or as we've recommended, maybe this would be on the annual property tax rolls? And finally, I think again, I don't think we'll get all the answers immediately here, but if we get, some input, we can come back with some alternatives. Is, how should these charges be applied for single-family homes? To a lesser extent, you have a lot less multifamily homes out there. There's a lot of agencies that sometimes charge everyone the same rate per dwelling unit. Other agencies have reduced charges for multifamily. You've got Pillar Ridge, which has its own unique situation. They have their own local distribution system. They have an agreement with the district over some of these charges that needs to be factored in. You've got accessory dwelling units out there that puts additional demand on the system, but it's not like that's doubling the demand of a single-family home. So there's a lot of different factors at play. How are you going to handle customers that have fire protection only? Maybe they pay a charge that's half or something significantly less than a regular single-family home would pay. And how would the charges be implemented for commercial customers? Again, a common way of doing that is based on meter size, but there are certainly other ways of doing it that other agencies have come up with. So those are kind of the key issues we're just looking to get conceptual input on, and we want to take that and work with staff and the Finance Committee additionally and try to hone it and come back with some concrete proposals or alternatives that the board could then weigh in on. So I put together a slide here, slide 11 of process and next steps. I think going forward from here, looking to get input, come back with some concrete alternatives. Maybe we get more input from the board. Sometimes these issues take a few times to hash around and get input on before people get comfortable with them. And at some point, you'd have to go out with a Prop 218 process, not only to adopt the rates, but there's kind of a parallel process if you wanted to collect the charges on the tax rolls. The district has done this process in the past, is my understanding, for its sewer rates, but you can do that kind of at the parallel time with the Prop 218 for the rate increase. It's got the same thing. You have to send notice, have a 45-day notification period, hold a public hearing subject to majority protest. And then, the goal is to get something in place so you can start implementing some level of this charge by next fiscal year and get it on the property tax rolls to start addressing these long-term infrastructure needs, which I think it's kind of recognized the district needs to start addressing at some point, sooner or later.
Thank you.
I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Clemens, I have a request. Could we ask Tanya, and I'm sorry for the spur of the moment, Tanya, what happens if we don't implement these charges? What happens to the district if we don't start fixing things? It sounds like a stupidly simple question, but I think it's important for people to understand that we've spent to acquire and fix the system over $19 million, but just like everything else, things continue to need to be fixed and upgraded and improved, and so I'd like you to just talk about, what kind of costs we're looking at.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, Catherine, members of the board. I'm the district water engineer. I don't want to paint a too dark of a picture, really, but because the district has made significant strides and the accomplishments in the past 15 years have been tremendous. However, the infrastructure that's in the ground or above ground, as you well know, people who live here, salty air, the ocean, and the fog don't make the facilities easy to take care of. So things do rust. We need new generators. That has become more and more apparent with the fires happening everywhere.
And
This
power
district
outage.
has done tremendously well during the power outages. However, the reason that was done because your management had the foresight to have emergency generators put in at every facility. They don't last very long here. They don't. So we would have to slowly but surely replace every year. We're replacing a couple. We need to replace them. There is an old tank up on the Alta Vista site that needs major work, and we have been fending off the Division of Drinking Water of the Water Board they've been on us to replace this tank. The district has repaired it since the system was acquired, but again, it's a metal tank above grade, and it's subject to rust, and it's very it has no service life left. So the district is keeping it alive and keeping water in it, so it's not a danger of falling, but the regulators are on us to replace it. That's easily a $1 million project that needs to be funded. So what will happen if we don't fund the infrastructure replacements? The system will further deteriorate, and we basically would be turning the clock back on what the district has accomplished in the past 15 years. I hate to say that, but that's just the case.
Thank you. And before we go to the board, Jim, you can comment on this if you wouldn't mind. When we were not our own water district and hadn't fixed our water system, and there was some discussion about being consolidated with the water district to the south, what were they going to do about fixing our system? Were they going to help us pay for it?
when we, 35 years ago, we asked, 35 years ago, before we got rid of Cal-Am citizens, we went to CCWD and we asked if we could consolidate with them. We asked to be consolidated with CCWD. And they said, this is 35 years ago, they said, yes, we'll take you over, but we don't guarantee representation, and you're gonna have to pay for all your improvements, and you're gonna have to pay on your own the buyout costs for getting rid of, there was citizens at that time, Cal-Am citizens. So, so it was, you know, so we weren't offered any assistance at that time. And we were told that we would not have representation within the new CCWD conglomerate. So we couldn't go with that consolidation 35 years ago.
Okay, Clemens, now, I just wanted to sort of set a little bit of the history and context of
What
what,
do you mean by representation?
on a board, Half Moon Bay would have controlled, the Water District Board has,
We
or,
would have nobody on that board.
exactly.
Sounds like a sweetheart
fair.
deal for them.
Thank you, Sid.
Yeah,
Clemens.
so, I mean, I want to add my perspective to this as well. Ultimately, with the water takeover, this community approved a $19 million bond. And so the majority of that money was utilized for the acquisition, but not all of it. So a lot of the money that we paid $11 million, so there was essentially $8 million left that over time, in the first 15 years, were utilized for infrastructure projects. So that really helped us create a capital improvement plan without having to collect it through rates. While this is a fairly unique situation, I think actually this is something that applies also at the states, that more and more infrastructure projects are actually financed through rates. We see that there's less money actually available for small water agencies through grants, for example, et cetera, et cetera. So what we have been running into is, so we were able to fix up the water system, and I think Jim did a great job explaining that we inherited a very system that was in complete disrepair. Had to go through a major overhaul, and we are now in a situation, I think, that is very, very good. We own our sources. We have modern equipment in most of our facilities, but what is aging is pipes. Even the facilities that we put in 15 years ago, we know will potentially last another 30 years. We were able to secure the Pillar Ridge water system, for example, the water production system. That's a system that is in need for tremendous upgrades. So we have some infrastructure challenges ahead of us. As Alex points out, we're not the only ones. This is something that all agencies in California are going to face sooner or later. And we have to, I mean, at this point, the math is rather simple. The income through our water rates is covering operations. It's not covering the capital needs, pretty much. So we have to figure out really how to establish a capital, or how to keep a capital program with existing continuing pressure from the regulators. That is a good thing. The regulator is ensuring water quality is adequate, that our system is up to modern standards, etc. For example, we're just in the process of completing the addition of a third treatment plant to this system, a fourth treatment plant. While we were able to remove one treatment plant, so we removed one, and that was a different project this year, we now had to add another treatment plant to one of our wells. So these are all costs that they're difficult to plan over the long term. We can, I think, very safely look out 5 years in a capital improvement plan. I know some agencies like to consider 10, 15, 20-year plans. These are guidelines. It's very difficult to predict regulatory changes, for example, particularly how regulatory changes affect an individual district like ours. So there's unanticipated cost coming up. And ultimately, we understand, looking at our system, if we have X miles of pipe, they need to be replaced between every 50 to 100 years. It's a very simple math that we did in the springtime. Actually, we had a presentation from Tanya here, looking at this is a very zoomed out, simplistic look at what do we need to put into our system in 2019 dollars to maintain it, simply maintain it. And that number is roughly $2 million. And that's what this rate study is essentially using as a guideline. So we're understanding to maintain the system, we have to put in additional $2 million per year. How do we get to this goal? And how much further can we really kick down the can was, I think, Catherine's question. I think the problem in California is that maintenance has been deferred in many agencies. And it's unsustainable at one point. So we have to start, at least, as Alex explains, we have to turn this around and try to start implementing some increases and get this in the right direction.
Rick?
Two-part question, or two different subjects. As part of the money issues, are we also looking at, I'll just generically call them bonds or loans, to fix the immediate problem, but could spread the payments over a decade or 2 decades, so the brunt may not be taken up with just the current people, but it spreads, and future people will benefit from everything.
This is a question to Alex, Tanya, Clement, not me.
Just are we considering that, was kind of
Yeah, no, that's a very good question.
pushing stuff out in the future?
That's a question.
Do
that
the
comes up a
maintenance
lot.
now.
You know, we're financial advisors on bonds and, financing for a lot of water, wastewater agencies, and it seems, and this is just my perspective, that using financing makes sense when you've got a big bubble of capital projects, and you like in the past when you took over the water system, and you don't want to have to fund, 10 million or the ratepayer, so you can spread it out over the next 25, 30 years. You did a project, I think, with your Alta Vista tank. Instead of trying to get a bunch up front, you obtained a state revolving fund, subsidized low interest rate loan that could spread the costs over time. What you're looking at here, though, I think, is not a spike in capital needs. This is a long-term funding level that you need year after year after year after year. So my general recommendation is that you really need an ongoing funding stream. If you were to take out debt, sure, maybe up front you could fund a bunch of projects, but then you have to pay that debt back over time, and you still have to get your funding levels up for the projects that continue to need to be done. So my general recommendation for situations, and there's no single right way to do it, different agencies have taken different approaches, is that you really got to get the funding source, whether it's a water system reliability charge, some kind of ongoing funding stream that's going to be there to generate the money that you can invest in the highest priority stuff each year. So I normally don't recommend debt in this kind of long-term funding situation, but sometimes it could make sense if there really were like wow, if we can do these $6 million of projects and take care of it all at once, and sometimes there might be some economies of scale doing that. I'm thinking one agency that wanted to do that was Mid-Peninsula Water District that serves Belmont. They're in the same situation as you. They got a lot of long-term needs. They had some critical stuff that they hadn't been investing in, so they took out, it was like, I think, a $20 million financing so they can address the near-term stuff with a plan that they're also going to be raising rates
Okay.
over time for the ongoing
Great.
funding needs. So.
Joe?
The second comment was, I've been attending some conferences like Aqua, which is all the water agencies in California, and LAFCO, which is all the LAFCOs in California. And the big subject in both conferences is California water. And we are blessed here on the coast to have, I'll just come out and say, one of the best water systems for the water that I know in California. Central California, Los Angeles, they are talking serious disasters where you're getting brown water, systems are failing, wells are failing, massive bailouts. It's just, they don't know what they're going to do. There was this huge corruption on this one down in LA near Compton, where the state finally just came in and took it over because they had no water meters, no hydrants, no billing system. Loans were going out to the board members. Why don't we do that? And just literal disasters where not only are you paying huge rates, but you can't drink the water. So one comment I want to make is the good thing that we have here is we've got wonderful water, and we don't have to worry about some of the problems. So.
Thank you. Jim?
Question for you, and maybe Tanya and Clemens and the Finance Committee. Maybe I didn't catch this, but what do all of you recommend is the minimum annual CIP funding target that we could do or should do? What's the minimum, and what's the recommended?
It looked like the recommended from the 5-year CIP, it averaged out about 1.8 million per year.
That's the recommended?
That was, I'll defer to Tanya.
Okay.
Does that mean, yeah, I mean, there's certain projects, so it's a little lumpy, it's not the exact same each year, but it works out to be about 1.8 million per year for the next 5 years. That's the recommended. What I was just suggesting with something like this, because it is it's a substantial increase in funding needs, even though ideally it would be nice if you can get there tomorrow, there are realities of, how you're going to get to this level of funding. So from my perspective, if you're taking steps in the right direction, that's a good thing. You might not get there next year, but the goal is a little longer term.
So would the 500,000 be a reasonable step, the lowest one on this chart? On your example of fixed your annual CIP funding targets, would the minimum one, a good step, be the 500,000?
We started at 2 million, then kind of dropped it down to 1.8.
Sorry to put you on the spot. But,
I mean, for example, a pipeline replacement project does make sense if you consider mobilization cost, et cetera. I think we're starting to look at these larger projects make sense only after $300,000-400,000 roughly. So essentially, we're saying we take $500,000 and utilize it for CIP. Now, you heard there's needs like generators, equipment replacements, etc. With $500,000, we hardly would be able to start pipeline replacement projects. So the $500,000 that is really, I think, a very low number.
So how about the 1 million? Would that be a minimum to go forward?
Well, I think as Alex says, everything is a step in the right direction. It's, if you're asking us if you're asking staff, what is the need? The answer is 1.8 million,
Okay, all right,
right?
okay.
So that's a $90 charge per household per month, if you do that?
It's a lot.
That's what it says on this chart. It's close to 2 million anyway, if you rounded it up.
That's about right, I recall.
$1 million per year. Yeah, if it was a fixed charge, it works out to, $1 million per year is about the equivalent of about 45 per
I
month.
thought he said $1.8 million. That's why I rounded up to 2 million.
That's, if you did the full 2 million, it works out to be roughly $90 per month. The details that may change a little bit, but gives you, I think, a ballpark sense of, $1,000 per year per home.
So 1.8 would be $80 a month, probably.
Yeah, I mean, somewhere around, as I said, rough $1,000, maybe a little bit less per home per year. My take was that, that's a big increase, and it's a burden on all the ratepayers, and
Wait, you said 1,000, but you have 90 on the chart. What do you?
1,000 per year. Annual charge, equivalent of about 90 per month.
Okay,
And,
annual
I
charge.
assume
Got
this,
it.
could be an annual charge. Well, I put it in monthly terms just to
Okay,
give a sense, So, do you have the long-term needs of, 1.8, 2 million per year? Yes. Do you have to start funding that next year, or you can't provide service? No, so there's some kind of balance there that I think that the board will have to weigh in on, and maybe you want to go all the way there right now, maybe you want to, phase in, and as I mentioned, there are some things that are happening in the future that this funding level can kind of dovetail with, and that's you've got the general obligation bond payments that the homeowners are paying now. After 7 to 8 years, those fall away, so there could be some other, that could be a time where you step it up over the longer term. So.
We are facing a similar situation on the sewer side. This is going to be the next item, and we already addressed some of that through a Prop 218 from a year and a half ago. That's for the past 2 fiscal years. And there we essentially said we're putting in some rate increases that are getting us in the direction for 2 years, and after 2 years we are reassessing. And I would suggest that that is something that makes sense here as well. I would not suggest that we're going out for a 5-year outlook. I would suggest that 2 years is probably the maximum we would want to implement, and after that we would reassess. We have potentially changing circumstances that could be in our favor or require taking more action. But we recommend, I think from my perspective, not to extend it over more than a 2-year Prop 218. We just came out of, was it a 4-year Prop 218 at inflation? And I think that's a little bit why we're also in this situation, right? And we knew that back then.
I'll jump in before Scott and just say I like the idea of having it shorter. I also think giving folks some control, at least to begin with the, and thank you for the fixed plus usage charges comment, chart. The problem with using the GO bond as a comparison is that is based on the assessed valuation of houses. So there are folks in town who have lived here for 30, 40, 50 years. They tend to be, as Sid was saying, or Carlisle, sorry Sid, as was said, they tend to be people who tend to be lower income, and something like just a straight fixed charge would be a terrible burden for somebody I was just reading that the spending power of Social Security income has dropped 30% since the year 2000. So these are folks who really are watching their pennies already, and I would like to be able to find some way to give them a real level, a level of real control. Meanwhile, the district, not this one, not only this one, but everybody who's doing any kind of construction statewide is looking at, and especially with the fires, hugely increasing costs of construction. And every time we have these huge construction cost increases have been happening over the last number of years that we've been having these terrible fires as well, and that multiplies itself. Tanya, I think you told me it's now $400 a foot to dig up or put in new pipe.
We actually, yes, I did tell you that. We just did a project on the peninsula, and it is a complex project, but the cost came in at $1,200 per linear foot.
Wow.
So
Geology, I mean, the geography of.
It actually, because of it's in the street, there's complex, a lot of interference.
So
utilities.
we might not be looking at that, but we're looking at.
Probably not, but I'm just saying, the bids are, Sam just got good bids. We were so happy, 8 bids, really good bids for the force main, but some bids come in exorbitant, and I always recommend, if the agency can, wait and read it again, because you just don't know. The general manager mentioned that we want to get the benefit of the larger scale, because then we have more interest, more contracts. So just one of the things we encounter here is less interest, especially when you have so much construction going on in San Francisco and the peninsula. It's harder to get here. So usually when it's a larger project, we can attract more bidders, and when there are more bidders, the prices always come out better. So to answer your question, I hate to say this, I don't know. 400 is probably low now.
Okay, I just want to give people, viewers and folks thinking about this, a sense of the scale of costs that we're working on here. I think when I moved to Montara, we were looking at an outrageous figure like $50 a foot for pipeline. And the problem with collecting now for the future is kind of like with Social Security, the prices go up and you may not have that kind of money available. But so unfortunately, we've got to do this. As Jim said, even consolidation with another district, we're going to have to pay it. The question is, how are we going to pay it that is the fairest to the people in the district? Because we have to have water, we have to have pipes, we have to have pumps. And with PG&E now, we have to have much more in the way of generators. So it all adds up, and we're going to be looking at this. This is for the public. We're talking about review concepts for the new water system reliability charge. I would like to get input. December, January, we're going to incorporate board and public input and develop and work towards developing the charges. So please send emails or text, so you can leave phone calls, but our office staff is busy, and it's better to have, if you put things in writing and explain it more clearly than you could over the phone. And then we will keep going with the public process of initiating the 218 process in January and February and putting out the 218 notices. My preference, to be real honest, is to be working somewhere around, well, one question I have is, if we were doing, is there a cap on what we're going to need? Because if we're talking about, just for round numbers, $2 million a year, at the end of 15 years, we've got $30 million. What are we talking about in terms of the longevity of these things?
I mean, my understanding is that doesn't go away after 15 years. There needs to be like ongoing reinvestment in the system for pipelines, generators, tanks, you name it. So, but that's something that could be, reevaluated in the future. Hey, an adjust course is needed, but.
I mean, if the
I don't
pipeline lasts
think
for
it's a
50
one-time.
years, we don't need to replace it. We don't need that money to replace it every 5 years.
Right, but if, with the way we're coming up with this is essentially we're looking at a very long lifespan of a pipe. So we're
Right.
saying we have 22 miles of pipe,
22 miles.
roughly, right? I mean, divided
5,000.
divided by 100 years at 400 feet. Do the math right now, and you'll see you come out. I mean, this is not the water system engineering. I mean, this is just me throwing out numbers right now. But it's evident that there is a higher funding need for our infrastructure.
Okay.
That works out just roughly. I mean, if we take 22 miles, roughly 5,280. It's somewhere at $400 a linear foot. That's over, could be $40 to $50 million in current dollar terms. Some agencies, what we've seen with some cities are trying to do now is they're trying to coordinate this with their street replacement programs. They're trying to do, they might be trying to do 5 miles of streets, and they're going to do the water and sewer lines at the same time and coordinate it all. So the different ways of trying to do this. And the other thing you mentioned, the debt service, if there was a need for an initial, economies of scale of trying to do a chunk of projects over the next few years, that's something you could, try to go after state revolving fund loan. That's a low interest rate state funding program. Right now, the interest rate is 1.3%, so it's less than inflation. It's not always that low, but, there are ways of trying to maybe get some economies of scale, if that makes sense.
I think that's something I would like for us to look at. Scott?
Yeah, I'd like to start by, there's a note near the beginning in the background section of water rate history, and this is something that, and this is part of the story that we have to be sure that we're really clear on and tell, and that's the very last point on that first page, and that when the economy took the downturn, starting in 2008, for the next few years, this district cut way back and cut into the investment we were making by holding rates down and holding them down a lot. Basically saying we're just not going to do any of the things that we can put off. And so we clamped down hard on the rates, and we kept it that way for a few years until we were sure the economy was bouncing back. And then we started easing up on that. But at this point, with that context in mind, I think it'd be kind of good to make this without that context. But keeping in mind that we just really tightened the belt and held it that way for about 5 years, and then slowly started easing up. Many customers may now be paying roughly the same in inflation-adjusted terms as they did back in 2010.
9 years ago.
That's not a sustainable long-term plan for something with infrastructure that is all mostly underground or exposed to salt air. And costs are going up everywhere, and inflation isn't the only thing that we're dealing with. I mean, we've got things that we have to buy, and those costs, some track with inflation, some do not. And we've got things that wear out, and they gotta be replaced. So you can put off, painting the house for a year or 2 or 3. I may have put mine off maybe a little long, but here at the agency, I think the chickens are coming home to roost. It's time to get on top of this. With that in mind, I do think it would be worth staff maybe giving us a little bit of insight. If you look at table 4, this is where the numbers are all kind of, these are the numbers that add up to the big annual sums. I would love to tell you a page number, but I don't see a page number. It's page 27 in the PDF. But you can see it's broken into existing customer capital improvement program and new customer capital improvement program. And when we talked about the capital improvement program, the CIP, in our May meeting. No, that's a
We're going to
different.
follow along,
That's a
but
different
maybe
tab.
it's not in the handout.
I'm looking at the
Yeah, I
packet.
think that's the
It's
concepts
not,
are
it's
all
not in the
deceptive.
handout. I'm sorry,
Is
it's
this
in,
this one?
it's in the
Yeah.
packet, yeah.
Thank you.
So it's table 4, it's roughly the 27th page.
I'm sorry, I downloaded mine from the website
Under
and,
old business.
I only have 12 pages.
oh, it's under old business in the, no,
No, it's under consent calendar.
it's on the consent from, it's the minutes.
I was just scrolling from the.
Oh,
I just
Just
found
trying
the
to
first
follow
table.
along.
Okay, so that's the minutes from the October 7th?
Oh, well, I stopped too early then, but sure. But this is the 5-year CIP,
I
right?
see it.
As we've, kind of the current image of it. In May, we presented a draft, and in May, the numbers are a little bit different. In this one, some of the numbers from 1920 have been shifted into 2021. Looking kind of like a softer start for fiscal year 19 and 20, then ramping to the much bigger number in the following year. But what I think would be helpful, and what's said in the CIP presentation for May, is that some things are funded through rates and some things are funded through the water capacity charge, and it's broken down to serving existing and serving new and future customers. Now, the breakdown in this table has kind of disproportionate, that existing is a much smaller annual number than the new and future customers. So I think it's really important to get some context for everyone listening about what is that breakdown and why are we proposing that everybody, all the existing customers, are doing both categories.
I think some of these concepts are a little bit misleading in the way that it looks like that all these projects are for new customers only. I think some of that's, there's a big chunk of needs that are needed. So the goal is that, the new customers are funding their share of infrastructure, and this is something that, maybe the terms could be changed, and we talked about this in the Finance Committee as well, when Greg attended the meeting as well. So it's not the case that the existing customers only need to fund $500,000 a year and everything's fine. There's a lot of the stuff that kind of benefits everyone, but the district did review its capacity charges that are levied on new development, just, in the recent year or two, and, wants to make sure that the new customers are paying their fair share in as well from their, connecting to the system. So, but I think that's a little misleading concept.
Well, that's why I'm asking
Yeah.
for some discourse on this, because it's, I think it'd be really
Yeah.
helpful. Anyone who just reads the report could easily come away with a, hey, kind of response to it.
You're exactly right, and that was discussed in the Finance Committee meeting as well, and I think this is gonna change, going forward to, more accurately reflect what the investment needs to be for the whole system for ongoing customer base.
Right. And it's also inflated through the big wave project, the new customer CIP. that is, a developer-funded project.
Mhm.
So.
Right,
that's-
well,
that's
you-
reflected to that.
Are you looking at that table 4 in the minutes? Is that the one you're looking at?
Yes. Mhm.
Because that 2.5 is just called out as a separate, I mean, it's actually pulled out below in a footnote.
Right.
Clemens, is there any action on the Big Wave project?
Why don't we do that under manager's report?
Sure,
Thank you.
Sure.
Sure, of course.
So, Scott, are you comfortable with that? Do you want a different explanation?
Not right now. I just want to say that as we go forward, we're going to need to get crisper on that delivery because this could be a sticking point for folks. And the thing is, we know that we need these improvements. That's the fundamental.
Yes.
And
That's right.
I'll highlight that, we've been talking about the capital improvement needs for quite some time. I mean, I just went and Googled on the site MWSD.montara.org water capital improvement plan. And Google's like happy to say, well, he talked about it in May, and it came up in the subsequent meetings, but I went back to the presentation in May and said, okay, it said draft, but this document that I'm staring at here and that document are very similar, except that a few numbers got mushed a little bit into the future. So I just want to note that we're being consistent in how we're coming at this, talking about it on a regular basis, and we've been pretty. It's only in these meetings. We do get them out on the internet, and we try to get the press in here. And I'm happy to say we had a member of the press in here on Tuesday night for our special meeting. That was great. Hope to see a little more of that. But we got to get the message out that we are reckoning now with a lot of, very simply put, deferred maintenance. And we're going to have to find a way to get as much of it done as we can without unduly burdening the members of our community. I do want to express a strong interest in doing what we can for categories of customers where we know this would have a weigh extra heavily. And I think designated low-income housing is one category where we can do something about that. We should definitely take a look at what we can do about that. And I want to make sure that we deliberately look at that and what we might deliberately do for seniors, especially in single fixed income kind of environments.
Mhm.
But remembering that the cost must be borne by somebody, and so what person A doesn't pay, person B.
I understand zero sum.
I
get
understand
that.
you.
I also, and I'll be real frank, I want to look at, like, if I look at what's on this table for fiscal 2021, there's some things in here where I might ask the question, do you need 500,000 or is 350 enough for the year?
Exactly.
This is the kind of thing we have always done. We go line by line and we talk about each and we see what it means if we do the full amount, more or less. And
True.
I don't believe we've done our job until we've gone through line by line.
That's absolutely true. And we have done it to the penny. Good. Any more comments?
Bob's not here.
Yeah.
Somebody's got to squeeze those.
I think I'd like to take some action away from this, and if we're just focusing on the slide 10 and looking at the 4 questions that we have. I want to be able to at least refer this back to the Finance Committee for further discussion, but at least get as much guidance as possible. So we have been looking a little bit at the funding levels, and I think there was a good board discussion that can help us already understand where the board would like to go, and we can take this further with the Finance Committee. The same I feel with question number 2, how should the charges be implemented? I think there was some discussion on the board right now. Third question, billing via property tax roll or other methods. I'd like to hear from the board a little bit on that, as well as on the 4th question, I mean, there was actually a little bit information on the fourth question. Scott, you just mentioned some of that, how should the charges be applied? But the more specific the board can be now, the better the finance committee can help us bring this back to the board in a better form. So if we can just focus on, is the board comfortable with this charge being collected on the property tax roll? Or should it be collected through our bi-monthly or other bi-monthly billing or other method? That would be a direct question that I would have right now for the board.
I'll offer some thoughts on that. A number of members of our community, especially those who bought houses in the past, say, decade or so, typically have something worked out in their mortgage for doing service on the annual property tax bill. So that's a mechanism that a lot of people already have in place. That might be a reasonable place to gather that amount. It's a typical place for a lump sum kind of number, and people have to talk to their tax accountants, but some people find some advantage in having it there as well. We can't advise on that, but see what your accountant says about that. So I'm kind of favoring that. I haven't really thought about it for too terribly long, but that's kind of my initial thought on that.
Okay.
I think level of funding, I think we should start out small and move up. I think it's easier for people to be able to deal with. Implemented, adopt an initial charge and reevaluate, yes. Phase in over multiple years, yes. I don't think we should adopt the maximum charge, but we should talk about how to phase these things in. Billing via property tax rolls, I like the mixed method between on your water bill and on your tax bill. I think maybe a little more complex, but I think it's a little more transparent. How should charges be applied? Yes to single family, EDUs, mobile homes, ADUs. I have mixed opinion because what we're talking about is the system, and none of it works whether you're on a fire protection only or need to draw it when you turn your tap on and need to brush your teeth. You still need that whole system to be able to do either of those very little or very large uses. So I could see doing it more like a dwelling unit kind of thing. And that includes fire protection service owners. They should be charged, I believe, equally. Because if the pumps don't work, if the generators don't work, if the pipes are broken, then the system doesn't work. And commercial, again, if we can figure out how to do it somewhat on capacity, that makes a difference. And for the folks who are watching on TV and in the audience, commercial, for instance, in Half Moon Bay, underwrites a lot of the charges for residential. But we don't have commercial. There was a time where the county was allowing commercially zoned parcels to be built on with single-family houses. So our potential for commercial has even gone down.
It's a big wave commercial.
If that goes in, But talking realistically about how little commercial we have as a percent of water usage, and if you look at the commercial in the district, you've got the west side of the airport, and those folks probably use less water than a single-family house. We've got a few restaurants, again, they don't use a whole lot of water because the equipment in restaurants has gotten so water efficient, they have dishwashers that use like 3 gallons of water. And so I think commercial is just part of it. We should take a look at commercial rates, but frankly, it's not going to make a big difference overall, in my opinion. And I see Alex is nodding. So those are my thoughts on those questions. And I would like for people to send us notes via mail, via email, via text, and we do need your opinions.
Do we ask any questions about Alex's presentation at this time?
Sure.
Sure.
Should I get up or?
Well, yeah, over
Okay.
there. Oh, at the microphone, please, Carlisle.
Carlisle Young, Moss Beach. I guess this is partly for Alex, but I was maybe have other thoughts while the board was talking too. I believe now we're just going as it's funded through the water rates, our repair and maintenance systems, right? Is that what you said originally? We've just been going along by, okay, so.
I mean, we finance some projects with loans.
We do
Others
now.
through bonds,
Mhm.
bond money.
We still take out bonds?
No.
No,
Okay, the only bonds in place is going to expire in 7 years, paid off, right?
I think 9 years.
Oh,
Well, you
okay.
have the GO bonds, which could go, maybe it's 8, 7, 8, 9 years, somewhere in that range.
That's for
And then
buying
they-
the system.
For buying the system, and also a chunk of that was used for
Right, 11
financing
million and 8
projects.
million, right.
And there was even another, like $1.5 million that those GO bonds funded a handful of years ago when they were refinanced.
Oh.
You were able to get more money out of them, and still the debt service was lower. But also the district has taken on a state revolving fund loan you applied for and obtained a low interest rate, state subsidized funding for the Alta Vista tank. So there's been a few, smaller debt issues here and there with the district.
So some of those could still happen. We could, if you,
Right.
my idea is, from listening to everything, that this is just to build up a slush fund for
No.
capital improvements that are coming down the
Not
pipe.
a slush fund,
No,
but we
no.
still
But
use
now,
that word.
right now, we're funding them through our rates.
It would be
period.
to build reserves.
That's kind of what I meant.
Well,
Okay, a reserve
I think you're going to be
fund.
funding it. I don't think you're going to be accruing any cash, because I think every cent, if you were to generate $500,000 and you've got 2 million of needs,
Right.
you're going to spend that down. So
Right,
I
okay,
don't- I
so
don't
each
see
year,
any
each
building.
year you're
It's a
spending
funding
$1.8
stream
million.
that's gonna Fund
Okay.
your capital. And we'll-
Yes.
So it's not a slush fund. It's
No.
going to go away every
We're
year.
asking to buy the red paint for the Golden Gate Bridge. Every year you need to buy more
Okay,
paint.
okay. But right now, it's being funded through our rates.
Well, what's being funded through your rates is a very small level of capital funding, because
Right.
historically, you've
Repairs.
kind of taken on debt
Okay.
for the bigger stuff.
Okay.
But, so the rates do fund a little bit and will help contribute towards this, but as I say, if we look back for last year, it's only 100,000 or so that the rates are generating, so the rates may continue to contribute a little bit towards it, but this is going to be really anticipated to be like a dedicated source of
Right.
more significant funding for capital.
And so if we're not really building up the slush fund then, so if we were to be taken over by because LAFCO determines or something, it wouldn't be, a big fund that, oh, look, they've got this huge fund, because we're going to be spending it each year for some of the things. I didn't,
Yeah.
your list wasn't in this handout that's in that book, so I didn't know what all the different
This was just
projects were.
conceptual, but I mean,
Yeah.
the CIP is continually refined.
Well, the
so-
projects didn't say. It just said,
Oh, yeah.
where was
In
it?
general.
The idea is to keep the cost down for the, future capital improvements. but that it's about 2 million a year, or $1.8 million. And then you said that on page 3, there was a temporary increase for other expenses in operating costs, but you didn't say what those were.
Yeah, I mean, I think the district goes through different things. Some years there's more and some things less. Right now, there's some more like engineering expenses being spent on certain things, and, you know, assuming if they go down, well, then maybe the rates will generate a little bit more for capital, but nowhere
Right.
near to the extent what you need. But all that'll, I think, get factored in, and as
Yeah.
you continue, you know, every agency kind of work with what you have now, you look at what your long-term needs are and take steps in the right direction. You periodically reevaluate and, you know, deal with what.
And
the
sometimes
realities
you
of the
take out a
future.
bond for those, and sometimes you just bill the users, is that right? If you came up with, like, you said you have a lot of deferred maintenance, but everybody does. But you have to think of repairing it over time, so that's what this fee is for, right? Otherwise, you would just take out a bond and redo everything all at once.
Yeah, if you only had
Okay.
$10 million to do, and that's all you needed for the
Yeah.
next 10 years, maybe.
Okay, so that answers that question. I just said here, funding source for capital needs, but my impression was we were already paying that through our rates. So then we had, you were talking about it could be a fixed charge or a, you know, reduced charge for multiple units. I didn't quite get that, because there's 2 big projects that are proposed, one for Moss Beach Heights and one down here on Airport Boulevard that are definitely going to be multiple units. So I don't know why they should get a reduced rate.
Well, I'm just trying to bring up, there's a lot of options, which is the way the agencies implement charges, and, you know, sometimes we see with if it's a multifamily building or an accessory dwelling unit or a mobile home unit,
Yeah.
sometimes the water use, the demand on the system tends to be lower.
Right.
So there's some agencies that might have a sewer charge that's, you know, $80 a month for a single-family home, but it's, you know, $65 for the multifamily unit, just as a different options to look at. But if you have a part volumetric charge, you know, people who use less would pay less, whether they're
Yeah, I'd go with that.
multifamily.
I'd go with the usage, because I try to be a thrifty consumer when it comes to water use. But anyway, so I guess one question was if we were to take out a bond. Now, I've been studying these school bonds on my property tax bill, because it went up this year a lot, and it turns out we're paying for 3 bonds, but it's a one-line item on our property tax bill. And they just keep stacking one more thing on top of another. There was a $36 million one way back in 1998, I think, not paid off. And then 2012, another one for 81 million, and now
Okay,
99
enough-
million.
enough
I
of the
know.
history of
I'm just
school.
trying to say that those are all stacked, and they had, I called the county, they have to give us a blended rate, because they can't itemize them on each property tax bill. It would just be too long of a list. But my concern is, since property owners are like a sitting duck, be targeted for all these bonds that they just want to throw, you know, more levy our houses. I just wondered if they're getting preferential rates, because the most recent bond for CCWD, it was a $99 million bond, and over time, 32 years, they were going to get $95 million in interest.
Sid, could you stick to the?
I am.
this
I'm asking
district?
him what kind of rates we would get if we had bond and,
If we do that, we
Yeah.
will talk about it, but
Okay.
that's not what we're considering here. And I don't want to mix that up.
I'm
Those
not
are-
trying to
those are
mix it up.
voted school bonds, so this is something that.
It's a separate kind of
This
a
is a
bond.
separate issue that you make, how are you gonna fund your projects? Sometimes it makes sense to try to get a state revolving fund loan. I don't think that would be a bond that would be put on, like a geo bond on your
Right.
tax rolls.
Okay.
Be something that the district has to pay in
Okay.
debt service.
Okay.
So it'd just be part of the rate, it wouldn't be a separate tax.
Well,
bond tax.
I'd vote more for the monthly equivalent of $22.52 a month to a homeowner, but if you end up needing that whole 2 million, that's $90 a month out of my pocket I have to think about. Maybe it's only every 2 months, sorry. Then there was one other question on here, and that was, you did say that on this last thing, that there was a possibility for Prop 218. Is that a Mello-Roos or is that something else?
Oh, that's the procedure that the district would need to go to adopt a rate increase.
Right.
You can't just do a rate increase, you
Right.
have to send a mailer out to all the property
Okay.
owners, letting them know.
We do that for every rate increase, whether it's sewer or garbage or
So-
water, and everyone has to do it.
So do you have, is there a possibility to produce something under Mello-Roos as opposed to having it go through bonds and monthly billing and all of that?
I mean, there are some agencies, well, typically, we don't see a lot of agencies do like a voted Mello-Roos bond or kind of a special tax bond for something like this. I mean, you're a water and sewer district, so water and sewer districts typically, I mean, it's the rates and the charges that they levy that are the sources of funding.
And a Mello-Roos is expensive.
Right.
It's expensive for the district, so we would prefer to keep the money going to the fixes rather than to the
Yeah, it
process.
doesn't, and people have to pay this at the end of the day. If you're generating 500,000, million, whatever it is, you know, no matter how you're doing it, that's just a mechanism for
Right.
generating the funds. So you know, water, wastewater districts have their own funding mechanisms and typically don't go out for like a voted Mello-Roos bond or something
Okay.
like that.
Well, there are some big projects coming up, so I mean, I can think of two right close to me. So if they were to have their own community facilities district for their little project, maybe that would be one way to raise some of the money. Because I know like down in Half Moon Bay, they do that for developers that put in a project. They'll make a separate little Mello-Roos just for that one property.
And that allows the developer not to pay for the local infrastructure. They put it on the backs of the homeowners and say, you guys are gonna pay it in the time, so that's a little different. And what you
Right.
have instead are the capacity charges or development impact fees. So as any development in the district occurs, they have to, you know, kick in
Right.
funding to help fund the
Okay.
infrastructure that benefits them. So-
Well, if you were to go ahead and vote, this is to the board, to put the property tax method, bill it to our property taxes as opposed to on our monthly water bill, that would be 3 MWSD line items, because we have already, my tax bill just arrived, and there were 2 MWSDs already. One was for the sewer rate charge, and the other was for the bond. So now you would have a third one for the water, what's it called?
Improvement.
Reliability.
Yep.
So, you know, that optically, I think taxpayers are really scrutinizing their tax bills these days. So you might consider just doing it through the monthly.
Thank you.
Sure.
I appreciate your comments.
Okay.
Okay, bringing it back
Okay,
to the
thank you.
board. Rick, it's your turn, and Jim, it's your turn.
No, I agree in having on the tax roll, as Catherine and Scott mentioned. And starting off on a smaller scale, maybe 1 million instead of 1.8 the first year.
Okay?
Okay.
Rick? Whatever, huh?
I'll just, if it can, I agree with the usage kind of thing. If it can be put into usage, it seems, then the higher the usage, you're gonna end up paying more, and the smaller units would pay less, you're using less water. So I mean, that has a lot of sense from my standpoint, instead of just flat across the board, and then the billionaires pay the same as the, you know, retired folks.
Right.
So that seems regressive, so.
Okay, any more comments? Moving on, let's move to new business, review and possible action concerning sewer rate study.
Thank you, Catherine. Just talk about this a little bit. So we went through some very heavy lifting in the past 2 fiscal years, or past fiscal year, this current fiscal year on the sewer side. And back then, it looked like we would need to continue actually raising rates, since we have some significant costs that are coming through lawsuit from the city. Also, SAM costs have gone up, and SAM is ultimately facing similar issue on the capital side as we do on the water side. There was very little money put into capital improvements in the past decades, unfortunately. And we've seen, and that is maybe to Catherine's question, what happens if we don't put that money in? I think the answer would be, well, then we would be in the same situation as the Sewer Authority Mid-Coast side was in the recent year. We've seen some significant failures of the entire pipeline system and at the sewer treatment plant. So that is, so that's what Sam is facing right now. Sam is looking at a $40 million, was it? I think it was a 40 million over 20 years.
Going to 50 with inflation.
Yeah. So, they're ultimately looking also at $2 million annual spending on capital infrastructure. All that needs to be funded through 3 agencies. The owner agencies, the City of Half Moon Bay, Granada, and Montara, and all 3 agencies have to went through some increases. The city has not at this time, but they are looking at raising their rates at this time as well. So once again, we did some very heavy lifting, and we decided that we would need a rate study at this time to take another look, to see where we're at, and that's what we're asking for authorization right now. So we're looking for authorization to start the sewer rate study at this time.
Gentlemen,
So moved.
so moved by Scott.
I second the motion.
Discussion?
Just one quick comment. I think all the citizens up here in Lost Beach and Montara should express their, I'll say anger, for lack of a better quick word, at Half Moon Bay for the huge expenses we're going to be going through because of the legal suit, which we now have to pass on to the customers. So a big chunk of this is because of Half Moon Bay. So please thank them.
I'd like to chime in on that. Read a document recently that tries to talk about the dysfunction at SAM and the spills and the big fines that came out of SAM's dysfunction. I want to point out, having been present at those SAM board meetings, that over the course of a number of years, working off of some excellent engineering work that was done back starting in 2009, but leading up to very clear, unmistakably clear reports about work that needed to be done, that really kind of firmed up in 2012. From that point on, we did everything that we could to act on those recommendations, and Half Moon Bay stymied the key ones, and the leaks and the fines that we suffered came as a direct consequence of Half Moon Bay's intransigence. Make no mistake. Now, that cost us all, and it's going to cost us, and that's unfortunate. Half Moon Bay took an interesting tack, and when they, after working with us on a strategic plan, having some good weekend meetings and very kumbaya, all agreeing on this strategic plan, turned right around and slapped a lawsuit on SAM itself, which they then put in the untenable position of SAM not even being able to be at the table for discussions about it, even though they were a named party in the suit. And they sued Granada, and they sued us, and we've been tied up with the time, the difficulty, the emotional strain of all of this, the intellectual strain of racking our brains of how on earth do we satisfy these people. It's been it's been a rough go. And as people want to criticize about who does or doesn't have time, I just want to mention that my colleagues here have invested heavily in trying to see to the needs of the members of our community and trying to do the things that make sense for us, all with an eye to keeping our services going, keeping our environment safe, our people healthy, and our rates down. What we're doing now is we're confronting the very hard reality that a partner of ours has put us in a corner, and we've got some work to do. It's going to be expensive, and we're committed to trying to find our best way through this, and we want a lot of community feedback right now. Alex, I really like the comment you made earlier, but we're grateful for the feedback, because that's what we really want right now. Of course, we always have ideas about how we might get through this, but right now is a really good time for feedback.
Is it resolved?
Is
The
what?
Sam lawsuit, I
I'm
didn't
not,
hear it was
I'm not in a
resolved.
position to comment.
Oh, so it's not, basically.
I'm not in a position to comment.
Sorry, sounds like something happened.
Remember, what was that, it was that CIA thing, I can neither confirm nor deny.
Sorry.
My best recollection.
What I'm happy to say is that a whole lot of people have worked really hard, and I'm very proud of the work and the community spirit that has gone into trying to resolve issues. So that's what I can say. But make no mistake, we're looking at a much bigger bill because of what happened they chose to do, and it caught us all by surprise, because after working on that strategic plan, we thought we had finally done some things to deal with some of the acrimony that had built up over the years.
And the recycled water project.
Oh, yeah. No, we had recycling on track. We were working on it. We had aired out a bunch of the grievances. We had agreed on some approaches to dealing with some of the perceived imbalances of the past. And we're ready to get to work on that, and then they served us with a lawsuit. And it's like, okay, well, if you wanted out of the marriage, all you had to do was say so. We would have been happy to have them just become a customer of something that would have worked fine. We show up meeting after meeting to discharge our duty and manage things, so if they don't want to do that, that's cool. And, we try to take our customers' concerns seriously, especially the ones who show up and share with us why it's a matter of, on their heart and on their mind and on their wallet. So I've gone long, but.
Okay, thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Scott.
And Scott, thank you. And to put one more layer on your comments, just as I spoke earlier about 35 years ago on our request to consolidate, in response to the few people in the community who are pushing to consolidate now, those same issues that I mentioned that were pertinent 35 years ago are still pertinent now. These people say that it's going to decrease our costs and our rates. Just like 35 years ago, it won't. And just like 35 years ago, there's no indication in these people's plans to consolidate of our having good representation from our district to control and protect ourselves. So there's no discussion of representation. In fact, we have just the opposite indication that there'd be a fair and representation and protection for ourselves. So those individuals that are pushing for consolidation right now, again, they say it's going to decrease our rates and costs. That's not true, and they're failing to recognize that there'll be no fair representation or protection for our citizens.
We've heard that business about efficiencies of scale before. Do you remember where we heard that loud and strong? That's what RWE Aktiengesellschaft was telling us about why it was lovely that this big German conglomerate was swallowing up all the water systems. We're going to be so efficient. And I remember distinctly confronting one of their officials and asking them to give me some examples And it is funny, the examples given would not have saved us a penny. They weren't ready to be put on the spot, but they were happy to say the happy phrases that seem to resonate with people. I'm sure that those phrases tested well in their A/B testing with a select audience, but we've got to actually sit down and talk to people like Tanya who actually go out there and make sure we buy the right pipe and buy the right valves and get the right service to get it all properly installed. So it's a lot of simple talk. I gotta say, I'm not really thrilled by the proposal to house all of the coastside's water operations at CCWD.
No.
But
That's a separate agenda item coming up, I believe.
Well,
I do want to say that, as opposed to the city, who believes their sewer pipes are underground, people won't notice. Granada, who is a gravity flow system and has very little in the way of complexity in their system. And so their attitude has been, as long as I've paid attention to Granada, is if it ain't broken, if it isn't broken, don't fix it, because there's no need. Montara takes a preventative maintenance attitude. It costs us, but we save money and fines in the long run, and we are able to preserve the public health in a very complex district. Lou, at one point you told me we have 12 major pump stations and 17,000 minor ones or something. I'm sort of exaggerating,
well,
but
we're hilly, and that means you have to pump.
we pump up in all kinds of places. So I just want to say that when we're looking at the sewer rate and our water rate study, the reason we're doing it is to avoid major spills, to avoid major water outages, to avoid major problems, and that takes an ongoing stream of money. And the philosophy of this district since its inception has been that, and we are probably one of the more environmentally conscious districts and also fiscally conservative. If we're going to be talking about things like economies of scale with other districts, we can do that through purchase agreements. There are other ways we can achieve economies of scale that may or may not be worth looking at, given the small costs that would be saved. But I think one of the other things that I will say is, with 3 people from our community sitting, and earlier it was 5, sitting in our audience, that's a greater percentage than routinely attend the Half Moon Bay City Council meetings. And we are here and we are accessible for our public, and people know where to find us. And certainly my phone number is, Tracy knows, is available. If people want it, give me a call, send me an email. That said, we have a motion on the table made by Scott to authorize the manager to initiate a sewer rate study with Bartle Wells, and a second by Jim. And we've had discussion, so all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries 4-0. Moving on to review and possible action concerning appointment of district treasurer, and let me cut you short, Clemens. I had a discussion with Rick, who doesn't have enough to do. And yeah. Remember when I got you drunk the other night?
I believe it's called triangulation, where you wind up taking on extra duties and not quite sure how that
I
happens.
heard something about possibly serving on a financial committee.
And a personnel committee.
There you go.
I didn't hear the,
Now, what I didn't tell you about was the connection fee committee, which I think we will just fold into the finance committee, so that's done. You don't need to worry about that one.
I'll be in New York the next 5
That's
days.
right. And the strategic plan progress committee, we're not going to be discussing that for the rest of the year, and so we'll sort that out after we have selected somebody to sit in Eric Marshall's seat. I won't say we can replace Eric, that would be incorrect, but to to sit in his seat and help us make decisions. So if, I would simply like to appoint, Rick. We need to appoint a new treasurer, and that's the one thing that we do need to talk about.
I would like to make a suggestion possibly, since we have a blank chair sitting over there, and we will soon be adding a member to our board, that I am willing to serve until the new board member comes on board, who probably could have better financial skills than I have.
So the offices are usually designated or delegated in January. We could do the same in December if a new board member is seated.
Because I'm also the secretary.
I understand it's already November, but since we are expecting an audit, and there are some challenges with the current audit that have to do with the missing SAM audit that we have to work through, as well as potentially looking one more time at the rate study. That's why I felt we need a treasurer right now. Understanding that the full board is going to consider all of this and look at a five-member composition once again in January.
So, and let me say that the, Sam was going to have a finance committee meeting today. The agendas were appropriately posted physically, but due to a small glitch, the electronic version on the website didn't get posted until 15 minutes later than the meeting was going to start 24 hours in advance. So Half Moon Bay city attorney called the SAM attorney and asked to have the meeting and actually said there would not be a Half Moon Bay city participant for that, so the meeting was canceled. And on the agenda was the auditor's report. So that meeting will be happening on November 25th before the SAM board meeting.
That sounds like a rather specific attention to a rather small detail.
One could say that one of the groups at SAM is actively seeking ways to make things look bad.
So that said, Rick, why don't you become secretary treasurer, which means you're not going to have much to do anyway, and it looks really good on. We'll give you your own box of cookies.
Twice as many cookies as the average attendee at the meeting.
How can I possibly
I do want to
resist?
point out that attendees at the meeting have access to the cookies, so if you're watching and you're thinking,
Please come and have a cookie.
every 2 or 3 weeks, you have a craving, hankering for some cookies on a Thursday night. We can't make any promises, but there are often cookies here.
Yeah. Let's pass those over too. Pass those to
Mike.
Those are your, I'm sorry.
No, Rick gets a whole bag of the Milanos.
Okay.
So I thought you guys had a meeting to appoint a new person. Why didn't you make
Well,
it to it?
we're getting to that.
Okay.
No, we have put the notice out, and so we are accepting
Application.
requests and applications to fill the
Letters of interest.
letters of interest, thank you. Scott and I will talk about the precise process one day, but my thought was that what we were going to do would be to generate some questions that everybody gets to answer, and then the 1 or 2 or 30 people who are here will get to each answer them, sort of like the Mid-Coast Council does during candidate.
So my question
So-
is
so-
basically, you
so
need
the-
somebody until you get the.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So the plan is really simple. On the 21st, we will meet, there'll be a public meeting, and people who want to step up and offer their services, we'll screen them, and we'll very likely make a selection. It's how I got on the board many years ago. There was an opening. Chris had twisted my arm and suggested that I come volunteer with the agency, and I did. I came and I volunteered with the agency, and I put us on the web, and back in the day when doing that was a bit of a chore.
And you put us on camera.
Well, but not in the beginning. And so an opening came up, and I stood for the opening, and Chris, who had twisted my arm to do all this.
Chris, who was giving the.
Chris Tholog, yes.
Chris Tholog, he was sitting in that chair. He asked some very, very good questions of members of the audience who were volunteering, and he led the board in selecting Bill Hill, who was a very good choice. And so I was like relieved, because then I would only need to keep doing the website. But then after a time, Bill needed to step away, and I volunteered again and got grilled again. I still remember one of the questions that Chris asked that I thought was very good, and I've used it as a guide over all these years, and have shared it with other people and treated it as a pop quiz. Name 5 different types of constituents in this district, and it was eye-opening, because I was able to name 5, and then he was able to name like 10 more that I hadn't considered at all. And
that was before we were a water district.
Right, we were just sewer, but part of, I think one that I hadn't thought about was the retired elderly single person on a fixed income, and that has stuck with me all these years, and it has been a recurring topic over the past 2 decades that I've been on the board, where it's hard to figure out some solutions for things, but it's not for lack of being aware of where we need to try to exercise our judgment well. So with that, I want to put out a personal appeal. It does take some time, but this is good work, and if we've got some civic-minded members of the community, if you're wondering how can you give back to the community, we've got an opening, and we would love to have everyone step forward. We've got some people who step forward and volunteer already and are well known here at the board meeting, and kind of like in the 2 rounds that I went through, sometimes it's surprising and delightful to see some of the people who show up and go, well, maybe me, and offer their services. And it's a really good thing for the community to see that people are willing to do that.
For the community, what is the time commitment per board member, roughly?
The simple time commitment, the obvious stuff, is the open session meetings that you see, and it's typically 2 a month. Some months have 1, some months have more. If we have it, like Tuesday night, we had a special meeting, so that'll make 3 meetings in the month of November, unless something extra comes up or we have a last minute cancellation. But then there's the closed sessions. Those can run pretty long when there are challenging situations with other agencies. We have committees that meet typically kind of ad hoc, but like when we need to work, when the finance committee needs to work on things like the budget, there'll be committee meetings like that. When we were going after the water system, we had a bazillion meetings to try to deal with all
We're
that.
not doing that again.
When we were working on working with the Coastal Commission to work out our permits to operate the water system and do the things that we needed to do to it, we had a committee that met very regularly.
Scott,
those
Scott,
kind of things
let's
come and
wrap it
go,
up.
but
10 minutes.
The real thing, the real commitment is the regular public meetings with the occasional committee. It's working with good people. There's a lot to learn, and we need the skills and insights.
We teach. You don't have to know everything. We will teach you.
And that's how I got on the board too. I was appointed, a board member left, and I was appointed, and then I ran for election the next time.
Yeah.
So, moving right along to manager's report.
Moving right along.
Did we appoint a treasurer?
To the really long.
Was there an appointment made?
Yes, it's Rick.
Well, we didn't actually vote, and I was hoping they would forget it.
Oh, no, the president made the appointment.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'll remember that.
Yes, you will. So, the directors, the general manager,
No,
report on system
PG&E.
operations during PG&E
Right.
power outages.
Yes, okay, thanks. So, I figured we wanted to just briefly report on what this actually meant for us. We lived through 2 prolonged PG&E power outages, and we would have benefited from a 3rd one, but it didn't happen, I guess. And now, this is a situation where PG&E has essentially warned everyone that it could take many days until power is restored. So it told us up to 5 days, which, in that, with that mixed information and unclear messages that we saw in the first 2 particularly. Of course, we prepared, for 10+ days. I just want to say this is, of course, what we do on a regular basis. We prepare for these emergencies. We have backup generators. We maintain them. Our staff is trained for these circumstances. So while we never want to go through these situations, a lot of what we do is preparing for them. So it was great exercise. There were indeed a lot of things that we hadn't thought before. For example, what happens to the well owners in the district if there's a prolonged outage and their tanks are running dry and they can't produce any water? So we set up a courtesy water fill station here at the office. The context between the agencies was a great exercise. We did have a direct contact to PG&E, but I think the information was very similar to what anyone got through the news. I want to just say that I felt that all the coastside agencies, all the agencies that we dealt with here, the local agencies, were very well prepared, and all of their staff did a tremendous job, worked through the night like ours. But I really want to point out that it's the large agencies that didn't live up to the same standards.
Wait, are you saying those who have a great economy of scale?
Correct. I mean, it starts with PG&E themselves. Comcast had significant issue. Comcast dropped out on the coast and was unavailable. Particularly a lot of lines through AT&T, Comcast, Verizon, the landlines, for example. What folks thought were landlines was switched over to voice over IP with very basic notifications that folks may or may not have read. So people were very surprised about their landlines not working, for example. Internet completely gone, or for some folks, gone. Caltrans shutting the tunnel down, right? I mean, Caltrans is bigger than many countries. Isn't able to keep a tunnel operating. So I think these were the real challenges. So we put a list of things that we did, and you see that most of them are, refueling the generators during a power outage is something that I noted, but a lot of it had to do with the failed infrastructure from the large conglomerates. So,
could we get some of that on the website? I think, especially things like the courtesy water fill station, it sounds like we've found a new way to deal with things that I think we would hope to carry forward in future events. I know in talking to some well owners, they were very surprised. They hadn't heard, because the internet was gone. We hadn't really gotten word around very much. I'd like to kind of increase the expectation that people should know that we've got a lot of stuff together, and this is a good place to be for certain kinds of needs. I think we should put some of that put some of that out there. I think it's good community info.
Yes,
How does
yes.
that emergency fill work? They come down and just get water, they have to truck it to their well, or it's just
Well,
gonna
up
be?
to their well.
Bring a bucket.
Bring
Yes.
bottles, bring containers.
So,
Bring a
so,
cooler.
when we're gonna do this with any outage that's coming, we understand this is gonna be a repeat situation. So, we have a big sign out here and a station where anyone can pull up, and it's a faucet, and you can draw
Yeah,
water.
it's free.
Is there a little tip jar
it's-
there also?
I mean, we
We take.
We want to put a
PayPal.
sign-in sheet, but the station is going to be
Internet.
open 24/7, and, you know, we're not going
Cash.
to
But
control.
just during emergencies.
It's, yes.
But it's something that when staff thought about for a minute, they're like, yeah, we can do that. And that's the kind of can-do spirit that really exemplifies the beauty of a small agency that's right here in the community. And everybody works for the district, lives in the district. I mean, we're all part of this, right?
Right. And, you know, for example, the only water agency that asked their customers to conserve water was the largest agency in the Bay Area, East Bay Mud. Didn't have backup generators for some of their smaller pump stations, and asked those customers to conserve water. None of the other agencies have to do that.
Oh.
So I
Okay.
think that concludes my report.
Moving into reports, I have nothing, Sewer Authority Mid-Coast Side meetings.
Have it called up here?
We have the, did you include the manager's report with?
It's at the end.
Okay.
And,
Do you want me to do Sam here?
why don't you do Sam, and I have nothing to report on Mid-Coast Council.
I got them all to report this time because I slacked off the other months. There's several important things happened at SAM. They've launched a project with Amoresco to
That's the name of it.
develop a project that's going to maximize with all these energy efficiencies and group buying to replace a bunch of stuff at SAM, but at the same time putting in huge amounts of solar panels that will save money to reduce the cost of the project. And everybody voted that. The segment 4 of the Granada Force Main was approved. They have an interesting thing for chemical buying this year. They've worked with a Bay Area chemical consortium. Saves about 25% on all of our chemicals. That was approved. We've had a significant problem with the digester. We approved an emergency cleaning for that and authorized the general manager to, go ahead and fix it. And then we tweaked the contract with the management consulting services for another $40,000 to help out with the audits and help clean up all the finances.
Okay, and let me add, the digester is, I believe, 10 years overdue for cleaning. We are lucky we have not had a major catastrophe. This is why it's better to pay a little upfront. It's going to be very expensive to clean it. They don't know what is broken necessarily inside of it, and it needs to be replaced. I have an agenda item on at the next SAM board meeting about Amoresco, but also just general direction to staff that I'm asking the board to take, and that is to give direction to staff that when they're working with a consultant or with an engineer, what we want is improvements that are off the shelf, easily fixed, potentially and hopefully reduce operating costs, and are not customized. We want like Delta faucets, Chevy cars, Toyota cars. We want things that are easily repaired and easy to take care of. So Sam, and this is my thought, but I'm not even going to add it on the agenda item, so that Sam can do the preventative maintenance and do what needs to be done in a more efficient and less expensive manner, because it's an old plant and we need to be looking at these things now. For instance, Sam is amassing a lot of overtime right now because they are fixing they have to have people on site 24 hours a day while they're fixing a fire panel, fire something or other panel.
Alarm. Fire.
Alarm. And so had that been able to be done earlier, it wouldn't have been quite, and in a more planned manner, it would not be so expensive. For the specialists that we've hired, there was an article in the paper, he's asking $1.4 million, which is a lot of money. But it's over the course of about 2 more years, and these are all, again, things that have been deferred. There is no employee handbook at SAM. Yeah, I'm watching your face. There are huge liabilities. We have an MOU, we don't have an employee handbook. The MOU is a different descriptor of what happens. We have things that need to be managed as Dan Child said in his interview, he's like an emergency ER room doctor. He's in to do these major fixes that, had things been taken care of, wouldn't need to be done. But they haven't been done, and they need to be done, and something people need to be asking themselves is, if SAM falls apart, what is the cost? What is the cost of a continued pattern and practice of deferred maintenance, of rotating general managers? We have staff turnover right now coming up. We have incredible staff at SAM. We are blessed on this coast with the people who work here, and but people are retiring. And we don't have a succession plan. And we need to be looking at these kinds of things. And a general manager doesn't do this. These are specialty skills that need to be brought in. And so when this kind of work is done, we can then hire a general manager who can be a general manager.
Just clone Clemens.
Yeah, we tried that once. I think Clemens learned his lesson. So
I didn't say give him to Sam. We just his other twin.
Right. So I just wanted to fill in a few of the pieces. CSDA report, Rick.
Quickly, there were really two. So CSDA is our chapter of special districts, of which there are about 26 here in the county. Supervisor Horsley gave kind of a status report of stuff that he's done. The interesting one, and I don't have the guy's name or his amazing acronym, but it's essentially a district, I'll call it, they formed countywide to be the sea level rise monitoring, coordinating everything group. And it's got a huge acronym that doesn't make any sense, and he laughed about it. But they're looking at state funding for it now and how to make it, give it power and stuff like that. So it was kind of a preliminary report on that. But that will affect everybody, and everybody talked about all the issues we have on the coast. We're San Mateo County, I believe, when Supervisor Pine was doing it, said that something on the order of 33% of all California problems with sea level rise are San Mateo County. So we are, because we've got water both sides surrounded, so.
Well, they did all that bay fill where all the sewer plants are.
So jumping to LAFCO, I went to the LAFCO conference. The big thing again is, oh my gosh, water is a disaster. And they just kept talking about massive corruption at this one example they showed down near Compton, down in LA. The interesting kind of evolution of what's happening is LAFCO has a 3-pronged mission. It's to protect open space, protect ag land, prevent urban sprawl. That's nice, except when the other half of the government is saying, and now you've got to put 10,000 homes in there also. So there's this conflict, and people are talking about getting LAFCO possibly starting to work with approving developments also, not just special districts and city borders. Very interesting comment I got from one of our supervisors. We were talking about jobs. You create jobs, you need more houses, you need more transportation. He literally said, and I think this was really interesting, I don't want any more damn jobs in this county. We've got plenty of jobs. Send the jobs down to San Jose. Let them worry about the housing. Let them worry about the traffic. We got tons of jobs, and talking about places like Apple and Google create thousands and thousands and thousands of jobs, and yes, that's great, but where are you going to put the people? And he said it's going to be an unending problem.
Just so you know, San Jose is just as heavily impacted as San Mateo County.
But we don't care about them.
Well, since I have to drive through that traffic, I care a little bit.
So that was just an interesting comment he made. I never heard someone actually say, I don't want any more jobs.
Wait, who said that?
So,
Well, okay then.
let's,
I mean, it's just an interesting comment. Everybody says we always need jobs.
Yeah, no.
Sometimes you don't.
And the notion, I mean, so much of what we've heard from what's that, from ABAG, over many years has been, well, we've got to, absorb a lot of this growth so that we can, have more and more jobs. And there's some magical thinking there, because this is the only thing that grows forever without bound is cancer. And, that tends to have an outcome that none of us is particularly fond of. Building something sustainable requires building something sustainable, and that part of that starts by acknowledging the limitations. There are plenty of landlocked areas like Hillsborough, which isn't really planning on changing much. And you look at the Netherlands, small country, it's got pretty strict bounds, and they've done some things to like grow taller buildings and do other things that. They went and claimed some land from the sea, and now they're giving it all back, and they're realizing, live within your means is the thing that you really got to do.
Yeah, and I mean, he also talked about all the cities are looking at something like the El Camino corridor. They're talking about more split rail trains and stuff like that, but he said the capacity for that area, which a lot of it's 1 to 2 stories, and that's like right on the jobs, transportation, shopping corridor. As an ideal place
That will give you
to increase the density.
Tens of thousands of homes, but
okay,
there's be a limit.
guys, it's 10 o'clock. Attorney's report.
Thanks, Madam President. I do have a brief report on the organic waste regulations that are currently being put in place. Chris Porter spoke a few meetings back, and she had Eric Patasner, I think is how you pronounce his name, from the San Francisco Recology Office in contact with me just to touch base, and I wanted to just be clear that Montara, the law is going to require Montara to have its organic waste ordinance in place by 2022. I think she mentioned 2024 when she was here, and so I just wanted to clarify that. So
we'll put it on our to-do list.
Right, so we'll sit down with Recology to understand our levels of service, and then if we need to amend the contract eventually, that will happen, but
Thank you.
it's on our to-do list.
Okay, director's reports.
I'm done.
I
Okay,
strongly encourage anyone who might have an interest in applying for the open seat.
general manager's report, and you were going to comment on Big Wave as well.
Yeah, so there's a written one, and then first one topic, and that is we're very hopeful that one of our wells will be ready to be put in service, a Wagner well. The project is almost complete, and if all goes well, then
That's a good
we
pun.
will, yes, no pun intended, then we'll fire it up, which means that we will start a pump test on our Portola 3 well, and so that has a small impact on Montara Boulevard East. It's not a very well-traveled road, but.
Nobody important lives there.
But some
You would know
folks-
because you live there and you don't know anybody.
I don't know anybody else.
Right.
Some folks will see some work there, and it's essentially a hose that's running across the street. We have, of course, the traffic-rated hose ramps and so on. To Big Wave, we approved their agreement 2 months ago, I think, right? And so by now, we actually received everything that we needed to be able to sign the agreement and execute the agreement. And I think that was yesterday, we were able to sign and execute the agreement. So,
Okay. Future agendas. Okay, we have some, but
Find a
they don't,
treasurer.
yes, find money.
Find a treasurer.
Good, we will recess for a short while and then convene in closed session. And thank you to Tanya and Alex and Allison for coming.
So I hear Bloomberg's looking for.
Allison's gonna stay.